The great Gary Moore is the subject of a new book called White Knuckles, The Life and Music of Gary Moore, following the personal and professional journey of one of rock's most influential musicians. Gary Moore, born in Belfast, you may know him from tracks like that, from tracks as well as Still Got the Blues and, of course, Thin Lizzy. But there was so much more to his professional and personal life. Delighted to say that joining me live on the line from somewhere looking very rock and roll indeed is the author of White Knuckles. And I'm speaking to Martin Powell. Martin, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Giles, and thanks for having me on your show.
No problem at all. Which rock and roll location are you in, by the way, today?
I'm in rock and roll North London, just outside Finsbury Park, mate.
Very nice indeed. We kind of think we know Gary Moore, and you think, okay, Still Got the Blues, the Thin Lizzy years, but there is so much more to it. And one of the things about Gary Moore, which always amazes me, he was really young when he was discovered.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. His dad ran a dance hall as a promoter, and he was exposed to music at a very early age, from the age of 6, really. And he was drawn to the guitar. And by the time he was 11 or 12, he was playing around clubs and venues in Belfast. And that grew over his teenage years, and by the time most of us were leaving school, he was fronting with a guy called Bruce Shields, a band called Skid Row in Dublin. So he left home, 16 years of age, and started playing guitar.
And let's just make it clear that Skid Row is nothing to do with the big hair metal American Skid Row.
No, absolutely no Sebastian back there. No.
Now that is a combination which would have been interesting.
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, the music scene. I mean, especially at that time. I mean, people were getting psychedelic. I mean, what time period are we talking here? Because it must have been interesting to be a musician, from Belfast or in Ireland at that point.
I think Gary, he came out of listening to Fleetwood Mac and to Peter Green. But when he joined Skid Row, it was the start really of the psychedelic and progressive rock era. So at that time, Skid Row, the band that he was in, were being influenced by people like Jimi Hendrix, by King Crimson, by bands like Spirit, and of course Eric Clapton and Cream. So that was kind of his key driver at that point.
And what point did he decide that he had to get out of? Because this is what Lizzy did as well, wasn't it? They were the biggest band in Dublin, or the biggest band in Ireland, but there was only so much you could do at that point because Ireland wasn't recognised perhaps in the way it is, and you had to go to the UK, which is a particular sort of leap of faith on all levels.
Absolutely, I think. Interesting thing here, Giles, is that Skid Row were more likely in the early days than Thin Lizzy to really kind of break and put Ireland on the rock and roll map. But for whatever reason, the band didn't take off in the way I think they wanted. And as you say, Gary was left with a choice. Does he stay in Ireland, or does he go where the money is and go where the record contracts are? And he did. He went to London and at first put together his own band, and then became an early member of Thin Lizzy, though he didn't stay around there for a while. It was a journey for him. It was a way of getting out from his original circumstances and basically following the rock and roll trail.
I mean, you can argue because an awful lot of rock stars discovered the blues, Chicago blues, whatever, Delta blues, whatever you call it, especially the British blues revelation, the British blues revolution, the early '60s, Ill Pie Island, Alexis Corner, the Blues Breakers, etc. And a lot of them didn't really deviate from that path, if you like. They sort of played the same stuff. Okay, they gilded it during the '60s, got a bit psychedelic, and as studio technology increased as well, they could do more and more things with it. But there wasn't that much experimentation, and yet Gary was into that from the off.
I think the key to it is he was a restless musical soul. When he first kind of came to music, it was the Beatles and the Who. And then as things got more progressive, it was Cream, it was Hendrix. But he was hearing so much while he was on tour. When he was in America, he was exposed to bands like the Allman Brothers and Frank Zappa. And it all came into one kind of melting pot. So when he started a solo career, he was drawing on all sorts of influences. And he loved that. It wasn't just about, as you say, Chicago blues via Cream. It was, stuff like Spirit, real psychedelic stuff, and very odd time signatures, which he was used to with Skid Row. So for Gary, it was taking a bit of everything, really.
And getting a record deal at an early age, were they trying to mold him? Because obviously, perhaps today you were more pigeonholed than ever before. I suppose back in the day, back in the late 60s, early 70s, they were more inclined to take a punt, to let you sort of discover your style and at least run it through for 2 albums. So you've got maybe 16 songs, rather than, you didn't get 8 million downloads on Spotify, you're off.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The bottom line is artists were allowed up to 3 albums really by a record company to see whether they could break them. In terms of Gary's profile in the early 70s, he was a superstar guitarist in waiting. We'd had Hendrix, we'd had Clapton, we'd had Jeff Beck, Jimmy Page coming in with Led Zeppelin. And I think he was kind of running slightly on the coattails of that, but with obviously his own brand and identity and sound. So I think record companies were eager to push that. But for whatever reason, it wasn't happening for him in the 70s or the mid 70s. So he got the opportunity to try his hand at jazz fusion with a band called Colosseum 2. And that took 3 albums. It basically, when punk was starting up, Gary was playing fusion with John Heisman, in 13/8 time signatures and paradiddles and all of that. So again, very eclectic choice.
I mean, again, perhaps this is the thing that he was allowed to do that, and he could go off and, because we've got, at the same time, you've got sort of Robert Fripp rocking up and doing Frippatronics, and so guitarists were allowed to. They didn't have to stay down one avenue if they didn't want to, and as long as they didn't go sort of 2 in the court of King Arthur, then they because nobody likes a 3-day guitar solo.
No, but there were quite a few knocking around at that time, Giles. I mean, I think the beauty of him was that he loved music at a fundamental level. So when he got the opportunity to play with musicians of the caliber of John Heisman, Don Airey, Neil Murray in a jazz fusion band, he was going to pursue it. But then punk happened. And that really kicked the stool out from that type of music. So he was left in 1978 with a very clear choice, either to go again, figure out what he wanted to do, or take up an offer from his old friend from Dublin, Philip Lynott, and he chose the latter. And that's when Gary became the guitarist in Thin Lizzy. And
it's an interesting one as well, because, I mean, he could have gone down that sort of Pat Metheny, John McLaughlin route, couldn't he, quite easily, and just kept putting out albums. But at heart, he's that street rocker. And
yes, street rock, and a very ambitious musician as well. He wanted to get himself on the world stage. And I think when you're looking at that level of ambition and that level of dexterity as well, it was an opportunity for him to show the world what he could do. And Thin Lizzy was a great platform.
And of course, as well, Lizzy are different because they come in, I mean, 72, 73. I mean, let's just get rid of Whiskey in the Jar for a beginning, because that was an aberration. Sure. That's just almost like they regarded it as a novelty record, didn't they? They weren't expecting it to be the huge hit. And then you look at, if you strip Lizzy down to the, after they get rid of Eric Bell, they are they're a rock punk band. I mean, they are, they're very stripped down. No dragons in the background. No maidens and damsels disappearing over the hill. This is, one of the sexiest men in rock and roll, Phil Lynott, and didn't he just know it? But a great showman and a drummer. And I think he always gets overlooked. I tend to
Brian,
think.
yeah, absolutely. Brian Downey's one of the best. Yeah. Absolutely. If you're looking for a man to hold down a beat and do various things around it, then yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think Thin Lizzy were like cowboys. They kind of rode onto the international stage. As Scott Gorham said to me, they were a fighting band. They were in the bars. They were like in the clubs. And that suited Gary. I mean, he knew Philip from old. They'd shared a flat together back in Dublin. And it was an opportunity to kind of join one of these bands that suited the times. If you think about it, punk was very much in the ascendant. It was about rebellion, and Thin Lizzy, they always had something of that to them. And as you say, Phil Lynott, what a front man. So Gary, he could only benefit really from being in that lineup.
And Scott Gorman, I mean, the double guitar attack. just the way that now. Other guitarists with bigger egos might have gone, well, you just do the chords in the background. I'm the lead guitarist here, mate. But one of the things that grabbed everybody was that sound with Lynotte's bass playing and the drumming, because the interplay between them wasn't really being done by other bands, or if it was in the aforementioned 5-year guitar solos.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there was a solid foundation from Brian and Phil. They've been playing together since the mid-60s, so they knew each other's style, in the pocket, really. When you mentioned Scott Gorham, he had to play with, he was changing guitar players every year, and these guys were brilliant guitarists. But as he said to me when I was doing the book, it was an opportunity for me to learn from these guys. And I think when Gary came in, all that jazz background and fusion and whatever, they really had to up their game to accommodate his style. So you had classic Thin Lizzy, all that swagger, but with a new level of musicality. And I think that comes to Black Rose, their most famous album.
Yeah, I mean, rather than writing about, I was saying, dungeons and maidens and trolls, they go and they mine the whole sort of Celtic, the Celtic stream, and also bring in musical influences. I mean, Black Rose, which I played in its entirety the other day on the radio, people going, good grief, yeah, exactly, because halfway through that, we get a reel, we get a jig, and we get Gary doing what Gary did best, didn't he?
Absolutely. I mean, I'll correct myself slightly. I think, Jailbreak's a great Thin Lizzy album, mustn't forget that. But Black Rose is, for me, equally as good because of that diversity of sound. You mentioned the fact that there's pop kind of rock on that album. There's some really kind of soulful balladry. There's a lot of confessional lyrics as well from Philip. He's getting to a point where the things that he were having to hide in the background were starting to come to the foreground. But, for Gary, it was an opportunity to show exactly how brilliant a guitarist he was. You got things like Waiting for an Alibi, Sarah, and The Mason's Apron, the middle part of Black Rose, the title track, where he literally had an amazing guitar solo. Amazing guitar solo. But, Giles, at the same time that was going on, he had a solo career in tandem. There was Parisian Walkways and Back on the Street. So he was playing two hands of cards there, really.
And you said he was living music, because let's not forget he's spending time in the studio with Thin Lizzy, which must have been an interesting experience. He's spending time on the road with Thin Lizzy. See my above comment. Good grief. And then he's got enough time. He wants to do something, because it would have been very easy to him to sit back and go, I'll be in my trailer. You bring me the third groupie of the day. But he's a musician. The reason he's in this is to play music, and everything else is kind of is a side benefit. So if he just can't do stuff with Lizzy, he'll do it himself.
Absolutely. And I think he had this song, Parisian Walkways, very beautiful, kind of like a French chanson in terms of its melody. Philip Lynott heard it, thought, we can do something with this. And that enabled Gary towards a possible solo career if he wanted to take that road. At the time, he was with Thin Lizzy, but as we both know, that didn't last. And that opened the door for him to come into the 1980s really as a solo performer. Yeah,
I mean, it must have been sort of... Do you think Gary saw which way it was going to go with Lizzy? Because after Black Rose... By the early, they bring in very interesting sort of guitarists. Some of them, Midge-Ure at one point, for goodness sake.
Yeah, sure.
And it sort of quickly goes. Unfortunately, we all know how it all pans out. So, do you think, Gary, one of the reasons was the fact that it was becoming more and more unstable, should we say?
I think Gary was certainly concerned by the road Philip Lynott and various other members. Scott, were taking. And at this point, he was quite a clean living soul. He'd had his days in the 60s, and he was a consummate musician. So perhaps there's something to what you say. I think he's looking around and thinking, is this what I want? Can I genuinely fit into this? Is this a long-term future for me? Or is the band going to collapse? And I think they were all very kind of pertinent concerns to have. He chose to leave in the middle of an American tour, it has to be said. But that reset Lizzy. They got in Snowy White and they took a different road. And Gary decided, I think at that point, to explore, as I just said, a solo career. First with a band called G-Force, who were he was the leader, and it was a kind of a new power soul thing. But then he headed towards, I suppose, what he'd call the metal years, which I think they were very, very profitable for him, but I'm not sure his heart was in that.
Yeah, but this is the thing, isn't it? Because you see all these bands from the British rock scene of the 60s and 70s suddenly thinking, hey, we better make some money here, because obviously we get the new we get the new wave of British heavy metal, and of course then we engage your loins, because then we go sliding seamlessly into the big hair metal, White Snake, you can stand up now and leave, and all those. But it was, I mean, they were shifting units. I mean, bands like Heart, who had come out very punky at the beginning, suddenly we're doing, all I want to, these big power ballads, and that was how these were getting massive airplay on AOR, for goodness sake.
Yeah, I think there's two things there. I think with the advent of punk and new wave, the idea of the guitar hero was in peril. But then in 1978, 1979, on the other side of the pond over in America, Eddie Van Halen comes along. And that opens a whole different door. So the guitar hero is back. And as you say, a lot of bands are kind of influenced with this kind of, hellacious guitar of his. And metal or hard rock started to sell in serious numbers. And I think Gary, being a superstar guitarist, one of the finest guitarists to walk the earth at that point, really, that was an opportunity for him to basically modify his sound, make it tougher, make it more street. He knew about that from Thin Lizzy. And you've got to say as well that he always kept a melody. It wasn't straight kind of, bashing over the head type rock. There was always a melody in there. And it served him well. And when he added Irish influences to that with the album Wild Frontier, he had, a huge seller on his hands. So, I think that you're right.
And then, of course, Seattle happens suddenly out of left field, because people are saying, "Oh well, look at Guns N' Roses are the most dangerous band in the world," and then there's this rumbling from the west as Nirvana, Soundgarden, Pearl Jam just come and absolutely go bam and basically turn it on its head again in the way that punk had done with the quote unquote dinosaurs.
Absolutely, and it's got to be said, it's great when that happens, because you get a reset, and that's always exciting. The question is whether Gary Moore saw that coming. I think in 1988, he was capable of packing out the halls. The record sales are really good and healthy. But I think he was tired of metal, and he was tired of where it might go. And he took a look at himself, and he always loved the blues. And when Seattle was starting to creep in on the rise, and the early 90s, Gary went back to what the music that he loved as a teenager. So we still got the blues, and that took him in a completely different direction. It took him out of metal. He reconstituted his image and sold 3 million copies in by doing so.
And at the same time, other musicians doing this as well. So we've got, John Lee Hooker coming out with The Healer, which is an album and a half.
It is, absolutely.
And people are rediscovering Bonnie Raitt, and they're saying, who's this Bonnie Raitt chick? And she's been around so you've got all that coming. And for those who can't get their heads around Cobain et al., to go back to this pure sound is again, shifts units. I mean, Still Got the Blues is a massive selling album and really cements him on the main stage. And perhaps he feels more vindicated because he's going back to doing what he basically has been doing and what inspired him from the start.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think it's well known that when Gary was about to go on the stage playing kind of hard rock to audiences of, 5 to 50,000 people backstage, he was playing B.B. King licks just to keep himself amused. And I think his heart was always in that. And the great payoff was he got his biggest success through something he loved. And it's a gamble at that age as well. I mean, he's nearing 40, might have been 40 actually at that time. And to actually change direction, to step away from your core audience, your established audience, and try something that was risky, despite the fact that blues was starting to again invoke the interest of the record buying public with people like Bonnie Raitt, the reissue of the Robert Johnson stuff, But he tied right into that, and it really worked for him, and it gave him a career, or a second career, until he decided to go into breakbeats in the late 90s for a little while, just, But that was Gary Moore. I mean, he was ready to change direction at literally the drop of a hat.
Well, I mean, obviously the chart success is always nice. I'm thinking, Out in the Fields and Parisian Walkways and stuff like that, which were massive hits. But you kind of get the feeling that he was doing, I always think of what was Humphrey Bogart famously used to have his F off money, where he would do films he didn't really like to get enough money so he could go and F off and then enjoy himself. And I think maybe that was, Gary was very happy that those big hits had provided him with the lifestyle, so he wouldn't have to worry. But he could again concentrate on the music.
I think you're absolutely right. If you earn your millions through an album like Wild Frontier, you've got hits like Out in the Fields, Over the Hills and Far Away. It gives you a stability. And his management were excellent. So he was sorted, really. And I suppose he just thought to himself, sod it. I'm going to go for this. I'm just going to pursue what I really want to do. And I think with Virgin Records behind him and his management really getting it right, that opportunity to join people like Bonnie Raitt, like Stevie Ray Vaughan, and just literally tuck into a very old genre, but one that's been put together in a very new way. And I think he was over in America, you had Stevie Ray Vaughan. In Europe, you had Gary Moore.
Yeah.
So, and it really worked because, again, his audience were getting older. And the idea of listening to heavy metal might not have been as appealing. So he could lead them with him. He was introducing them to older and new sounds, I think.
Good idea. Yeah, this is the thing, because one of the problems that, that Jimmy Page had was when he went, when Zeppelin had finished, and the people, there'd be kids at the front going, do Stairway. And you can't you? You can get the situation where people just want to hear Lizzy tracks or Parisian. And if you're trying to explore a new direction, you have to hope that your audience will get that. And I always say this, that rock fans are the most loyal in the world, and they will support a band till the ends of the bleeding earth. But you do have to hope that your audience has the intelligence, which obviously they do, to stick with you and see where you're going.
I think in Jimmy's case, with Led Zeppelin, where the hell do you go? If the band, is no more, what do you do? I mean, people are going to spend the rest of their lives asking to hear Stairway to Heaven. So, I mean, the weight on his shoulders was considerable, I think, in the early 80s. I think with Gary, I think a lot of people had talked to him over the course of that decade about trying something new. I think if you look at it, it was brilliantly marketed, the reinvention of Gary Moore. Gerard Mankiewicz' front cover, that picture of Still Got the Blues where the boy's playing the guitar and then you flip it over and you've got the musician in the hotel room. Very evocative stuff. The choice of material. The guitar's still quite overdriven. And, that allows people to come with him. It's not a whole new sound. He wasn't going back to sounding like Peter Green. This was kind of supercharged blues. But again, Gary doesn't often get credit. He's a good singer. He can carry a melody. So all of that in conjunction allowed him to join the new blues movement. And I would argue lead it, actually, in Europe until such time as I said earlier, he again wanted to try something new.
What about, we know the professional stuff, but what about the personal stuff? I mean, we know that there were rock and roll casualties on the way, and he sort of, he had obviously a gigging musician, a touring musician, and life on the road. It's difficult to get a relationship, isn't it? It's difficult to put down roots.
Yeah, I think it was for him, to be honest with you. I mean, there were several partners over the course of the decades, and I think if you're a musician, think about in practical terms, your life is essentially the road for 3/4 of the year. You then come back, you see your family, in Gary's case, he actually used to take his wife with him occasionally, and so I think he tried really hard, but this is a hard life on people. It's hard physically, and it's you're the king of the hill. And basically, if you can't really be ill that night because you've got people relying on you. You know, your record company wants their next record. It's like being the CEO of a huge company, you know? And Gary's brand was himself. He was a solo artist. So yeah, it was going to be difficult both personally and professionally, I think. But it's a hard balance.
But at the same time, he wasn't, behind 8,000 layers of security. We were just talking before. I mean, he spent time down my part of the world, down here in southern Spain, and he would drop in and jam with the unsuspecting guys who had I think they were an Ecuadorian guitar band who were playing in a hotel, and he'd drop in and jam. I know, there's pictures. And you just said there are 4 or 5 places down in Brighton that he'd pop into.
Yeah. I mean, Gary, I think he was a down-to-earth man. You know, I think it comes back to one central factor, just a love of music. So, you know, when he was off the road, some musicians might just want to, pull up the gate and just sit down and watch TV. Gary he had itchy fingers, and he wanted to get out and play. So when he came off the road, he would end up playing in local bars, local blues nights. I mean, where he lived down in Hove, there was a succession of pubs that he would nip into, basically pull on the guitar, maybe 20, 30 people in the audience. It wasn't billed. He was just, as you say, he just wanted to get there and do this stuff. So when you were telling me earlier that he was doing that, in Spain down the road from you, no great surprise. He just loved music. Couldn't get enough of it.
And then, bam, heart attack, undisguised heart condition. Everybody by surprise. I mean, because he had the face towards the end. He had the face of an old bluesman. Great, but in terms of blues, you can keep doing the blues. I mean, look at John Lee Hooker. He did keep doing the blues until you're 80.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was a great shot within the rock community. I mean, I remember waking up to it, and there was a sense of because he was so young, as you say, he was 58 years of age. A heart attack, it's no time. Because I would actually argue that the older he got, the more subtle and keening is a good word, his guitar playing became. The stronger and more polished a singer he became. And it would be absolutely brilliant, Giles, to have heard what he could have done with that, because you've got performers now who are coming into their 70s and their 80s. And frankly, back in the 60s, that would have been incomprehensible that Mick Jagger would be on a stage at that age. But they're getting older and they're showing where it could have gone. And it's just such a sadness that Moore wasn't able to join them in that journey.
But, I mean, the way that Gary did his stuff with breakbeats and stuff, I mean, he wouldn't be doing the old, he'd probably have, a sitar orchestra or something behind him. He would have found, that he would have found something in there to amaze us. Why the book, Martin? Because, and why now?
The book we discussed several times over a number of years, and I'd done books on Jeff Beck and I'd done books on Jimmy Page. And I just thought I'd love to do, when they started talking to me about the idea of a Gary Moore book, I thought, I'd seen him so many times in concert. I'd listened to so many albums over so many years. I loved the music, and it was a great opportunity for me to honour it. Why now? I guess it's because if you look back, it's been a few years since he passed. You don't want the legacy to slip away, do you? You just want to bring people back to what was so good about him as a guitarist, but bigger than that, as a musician. He really was a great musician. And the people I interviewed for the book, and there were a lot of them, they really loved that. They loved his drive and his determination, and they loved the soul of his playing. Nobody said anything bad about Gary Moore. It was all about, Jesus, this guy's a great player. He was a good bloke. So, yeah, I hope that's an answer to your question.
It is indeed. The book is called White Knuckles, The Life and Music of Gary Moore. As you can probably tell, Martin, I could talk about this until probably about next Wednesday, but unfortunately. If people want to find out more about what you do and about the book itself, where can they go?
Go to Amazon. There's a plug for Amazon. Omnibus Press are the publishers, and I hope that people do get a chance to investigate it and have a look.
And do you have a website of your? Do you do the social media?
I do not actually. I don't do it as much. No, I kept out of the spotlight. I think but that enables me to pop up like a little duck every now and again with a book.
Well, listen, congratulations on the book. He's a brilliant talent. The book is called White Knuckles, The Life and Music of Gary Moore. It's by Martin Powell. Martin, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much indeed. It's a pleasure, Giles. Lovely to meet you.